Hello, here we go. We are here for probably my favorite lecture, honestly. So let's talk about citations and why following citations matter. I gave you the brief bit earlier with the systematic review and all that, but let's talk about it in a bit more practical terms. The picture on the left is the Daily Mail in 2023 talking about how supposedly there was a trans woman who was running around killing sex workers and that sort of thing. This was actually an entirely different time scale of the type of thing they're talking about. They're saying, this was a trans person who was going around killing people because they wanted to make, a controversial, moral, panicky headline. Well, the murders happened in 1990. The transitioning was in 2000. The conviction was in 2017. So this was not a recent thing. It was not something where the person's gender identity and the murders actually interacted at all. In fact, it sounds awful lot like this newspaper is trying to just cherry pick things from different parts of one person's life to make a narrative rather than actually report the news. We're going to get into that. First and foremost, you know how this happens a lot of times is people just copy stuff from other folks and they don't examine it, they don't critically evaluate it, they just repeat the same thing over and over again. You can end up with all sorts of different kinds of plagiarism this way. So let's talk about plagiarism by aggregation. That's when you don't have anything actually original in your paper, you're just copying stuff from other people, putting it all together, and there's nothing new. Self-plagiarism is taking and using something you've already submitted before for a new assignment. Basically, it's submitting a paper that you already did submit earlier. As a side note, if you want to continue researching the same subject through multiple projects, just talk to your instructor about that. Like, your professor probably will think you are being a real go-getter and talk to you about how to do that correctly. Continuing research is actually something that we encourage because it's a really cool thing and a good way to find your calling. Just don't submit the same paper over again. Then, of course, there's inadvertent plagiarism. That's when you just literally forget to cite something. It happens. Copy-paste, that's the traditional plagiarism. That is just taking a copy and pasting it into your paper wholesale. And, of course, synonym plagiarism is the classic thing where instead of saying I walked down the road, you copy it and say I strode down the road. Well, you just changed a word, but it's still the same sentence. It's still clearly the same sentence. Now, here's the big academic definition of plagiarism. Like I said, submitting works that aren't your own, paraphrasing or summarizing works of another person, quoting the work of another person without citation, using someone else's research, all that. Plagiarism by aggregation, self-plagiarism, inadvertent plagiarism, copy-paste plagiarism, or synonym plagiarism. Again, like I just said. And you can also pause here if you want to read the full thing. But big thing for here is patchwork plagiarism. What we've got here are two different sources. I got this from Northern Illinois University's patchwork plagiarism page. Basically, what we got is a paper where the draft takes two different sources' sentences and copy-pastes them together and patches them together. What this person did in the correction was they found the part that needed to be quoted, the part that was an actual specific quote, and then went through and made those quotes, which are then cited, and then go into explaining things and synthesize them together. They talk about around 1/5 of the land area of the globe was colonized by European nations. One of the major repercussions of colonialism is the existence of African borders, which were not much of a concern. That sort of thing. That is taking that information on the left side and making something out of it. A lot of times when people say use your own words, this is literally what they mean. So, fun fact, last time I did this class, right after the class ended, a rather infamous video came out called Plagiarism in YouTube. This is actually a really good case study on how plagiarism can negatively impact your career. So, the guy with the blue wall behind him is a guy named James Somerton, if you aren't familiar. He was put forward as one of the big faces of YouTube video essayists. He was also, whenever there was a YouTube Pride thing, he was the face of that. He was extremely forefronted on YouTube. Here's the thing. His videos, in fact, were mostly copy-pasted from other people. And if you started Googling the text of his videos, you would find that out. Plagiarism in YouTube includes the little man breaking in behind James right there is a guy named Harry Brewis, also known as H-Bomber Guy on YouTube. He did a huge expose about all the plagiarism that James Somerton was doing. When I say all the plagiarism, the large picture to the right is all of the different authors he plagiarized, highlighted by color in a script. That is one script. That is not a bunch of scripts. That is just one script. And you can just see also just the huge giant block where there's one page that is entirely, actually, correction, you can see the two pages that are just entirely one block of a color. This guy had over 300K subs on YouTube. All it took was Googling this thing. This guy was copy and pasting other people's stuff. He was passing it off as his own and trying to get accolades for it. He did Indiegogos for producing things that never got made. This guy was doing all sorts of stuff. And after, I'm not even kidding, if you aren't familiar with this, it's not going to sound realistic, but it's actually what happened. After all of this, after he was found out, Somerton literally faked his death to avoid getting out of the punishments and having to deal with paying people for stuff he stole. He also resurfaced a couple months later on TikTok because he could not stay away from blogging about stuff. So we know that he did not, in fact, actually die. that was him faking his death to get out of plagiarism consequences. Now, let me talk to you about how not only plagiarism, but just that game of telephone can be a problem. I showed you that little news article from the very beginning, but this is going to be a bit more specific and also a bit more widely reaching, let's just say. What does the word airborne mean when someone says there's an airborne pathogen? If something's less than 5 microns, it's aerosol, which is a liquid particle that can stay in the air. Well, if it's more, then it's a droplet, and that doesn't stay in the air, or does it? Because, well, if you've ever sneezed, you know droplets can stay in the air and can travel through the air. But here's the thing, is the 5 micron number all that it takes to change it? Where'd it come from? So let's track down the 5 micron number. This is very important. So anyways, the WHO and the CDC cite that number. They didn't derive it. Again, the World Health Organization and the CDC are citing a number as a model, and it determines liquid aerosols. And what is this about? Well, it's about COVID. So what we've got here is a question about whether or not an aerosol can spread the disease and how to block it. In the early 20th century, there were tuberculosis studies that were using the 5 micron number. They were talking about airborne contagion and air hygiene. The book was also disputed, by the way, after they published in 1955. Turns out that after doing a lot of fact checking, TB is an airborne aerosol. 5 microns is the aerosol level of particles that can infect someone with tuberculosis specifically. The 5 micron number the WHO and CDC were citing for COVID was in fact not an accurate number for COVID. Well, what happened? All of a sudden, we had people thinking that if you just blocked something that was an aerosol of 5 microns, you would not have to worry about COVID. What actually happened? Well, turns out COVID can kill even if you do that. As they say in the article, the teeny tiny scientific screw up helped COVID kill. People were able to get infected because they were using a number for tuberculosis aerosols, and COVID could still infect someone. The one thing is, after all of this, I want you to know the drive for research, the drive to find out more stuff about the world. I do not know everything. What I know how to do is to look for stuff and find new things. And that is an amazing skill to have. And I want y'all to have that same drive to go through, to fact check, to look stuff up, to follow through on links, follow through on information. It is an amazing field. And no matter what kind of thing you want to research, you can find just absolutely amazing things. And when you do this, when you think critically, when you look up sources, when you follow through on this sort of stuff, you do help spread actual knowledge through the world. We've seen here all this stuff where I talk about misinformation and bad stuff that people were doing. But the fact is that got found because people were able to do research. People were able to rat out all sorts of misbehavior and unethical behavior because of research. I think that is a really cool thing. Well, first off, I want to say thank you for being in this class. I genuinely love reading your papers and I love reading your responses. So feel free to swing by, send me an email if you got questions, if you need help, all that sort of thing. Thank you for being in my class.